We got here late because we didn't know what room we was in. We've been all over campus.
Sorry.
I don't move like I used to, so forgive us. The current administration, I don't want you to feel that it's not good to speak about it, but thinking and what's going on, I'm a little confused in a way, and I'm very concerned. You may have expressed those thoughts already.
I did, but I'll do it again.
Okay.
And, you know, I don't work for him anymore, so I have a lot of freedom. Yeah, I think you have cause to be concerned. I think we had some hope in Ryan Zinke as the Secretary of the Interior. He's kind of a classic Western congressman, Montana cowboy that would come in. He's professed to have values commensurate with Teddy Roosevelt, and he loved Glacier National Park. But let's just, let's look at the evidence since then. There have been a series of actions that have undermined conservation by the Department of Interior. Some of it is pure incompetence, and some of it is intentional. The good news is on the incompetence side, in my mind, because there's not very many people in the department right now that are in the position to sort of execute upon some of the bad ideas that they're putting forward. I mean, you know, if you follow politics very much, they'll profess that, these were last minute, actions by the previous administration that were put in place in December. Well, we were working on those things for 5 years, right? Okay, it takes that long to write a regulation, and it takes about that much long to rewrite it. And unless there's somebody there to be rewriting it, it's not going to happen. They can do all the secretarial, presidential orders they want. If nobody actually implements it, then it doesn't really have much long-term effect. But they have done some things like reducing Bears Ears National Monument from over a million acres down to a couple 100,000 acres, and basically disrespecting the Intertropical Coalition, and something similar over at Grand Staircase Escalante, which has been, was established by Bill Clinton, so that's been around a long time, and there's actually a fair amount of public support for that, even locally now. The opening up the Outer Continental Shelf for leasing, driving forward new leasing on public lands, rewriting a lot of the regulations, all of that is underway, and I would be deeply concerned. I think things are much worse in EPA than Interior, because I think Pruitt is more intelligent and more specific on what he's trying to do, and I think that we will see a lot of undermining of the core of conservation laws that give us clean air, clean water, clean communities as a result. So I would be deeply concerned.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sort of following up on, you mentioned Bears Ears and National Monuments, and you're probably aware that they're getting ready to undertake management plans for both of those monuments, or under that BLM management, the renewing plans. What hope do you see for those management plans in terms of sort of successfully conserving those resources?
Well, of course, the management plans are being written for the much smaller Bears Ears, right? It's for just the, and I've been there. I mean, I went out and sat up between the Bears Ears buttes with the tribe, with Sally Jewell, the secretary. We went out on the lands. I mean, there are over 100,000 archaeological sites across that place, and so it's narrowing it down to just the two buttes and a few locations ignores the extraordinary resources over this larger landscape. So I don't really understand how, unless the management plans, I mean, the great thing about management plans is they can take a long time to write, and
first there's the secretarial order,
get it done.
For them to be done quickly.
Right,
so
right.
We'll see. Orders are one.
Yeah, I mean, we did investigate the mineral potential of those areas, and there's not a lot out there that for oil and gas, maybe a little uranium, and if they lease those out, the downside of that process, of course, is if they grant a lease to a development company, they don't have to actually develop it, but they can sit on the lease, and then if you want it back, you have to buy it from them.
And they can build a road.
Yeah, they can build a road. They can do, well, they're actually required to do something. But they can go out there and mess the place up a little bit and pretend they're actually mining. That's the downside of of that. And so while they're still in the public land estate, there can be degrading efforts. And I was on the ground with the rangers and both the tribes out there, and there's a lot of pilfering of the archaeology there. There's a lot of ATV use, a lot of that would just continue on. So I don't hold a lot of high hope for those management plans actually having much effect.
I have to insert that hindsight is always 20/20, and the Obama administration's mistake was making Bears Ears a BLM national monument instead of a National Park Service national monument. Because it would be governed under the Park Service Organic Act, not the BLM, Multiple Use Sustained Yield Federal Land Management Policy Act. And it would be much harder politically to take a monument away from the Park Service than from BLM. And of course, I worked 8 years in the Clinton administration, and it was Bruce Babbitt, my boss, who established the first BLM managed national monument, which I resisted at the time, but they did it anyway because they wanted to make BLM into a conservation agency and not just, Bureau of Livestock and Mining.
Yeah.
And so he set the precedent that Obama continued, and it was still a mistake when Obama did it. And most of Bears Ears could have been added to Canyonlands National Park, which it's adjacent to.
It should have been, anyway. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, I met you briefly, probably 3 years ago in San Francisco at the City Parks Alliance conference. And you talked about the importance of engaging urban areas in the conservation efforts in the National Park Service. I would love to hear from you what happened, like what's been going on and how successful that's been, and what the status is with the Park Service and like engaging, urban communities, but also just like urban areas in general and parks management.
So from that conference with City Parks Alliance, we launched a Urban Matters initiative within the Park Service, and we looked at a couple things. We looked at the sort of urban footprint that we already have. So there are places like Gateway National Recreation Area in New York City, Golden Gate National Recreation Area in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, the National Capital Parks in Washington, D.C., others, Rock Creek, those kinds of things. They have one particular role in that they're already in those communities, and how can they be more creative, more innovative to reach out and connect with communities that are adjacent. And so, for instance, like in Washington, D.C., I directed the team there to say, okay, the National Mall is great. It'll eat you alive, okay? If you want to have impact, work in Anacostia. Okay, Anacostia is the place is the happening place, and a real opportunity to do something very, very new and creative with that community. And while over time it will gentrify, let's not displace the community in the process of gentrification. Let's figure out how to build a relationship with the asset of green space. We also looked at places that are like national park units that are near cities, so like Saguaro in the city of Tucson. What is that relationship, and how can we really begin to bring people from the community that may be next door but they've never been there, or Santa Monica Mountains in the city of Los Angeles, and then the more distant ones, which is a little tougher. And then we began to look at, so for instance, we were able to carve out a portion of the Land and Water Conservation Fund to create grants that would create new parks in park deficient communities that met a certain ethnic mix that we were looking for. And we began to grant these out. We basically had about $15 million that we could go in and create parks in new communities as well. And we created a whole working team around that. We've got the Stewardship Institute that's working on it as well. So I think that to me, that some of the greatest innovation today in the world of parks is in the urban space. And we also began to look at it from a biodiversity standpoint, how that parks created, maintained, or restored within an urban landscape can connect with riverways and pathways and migratory routes to contribute to overall biological diversity at the same time. And to look at how they can achieve multiple values, whether it's public health, it's conservation, it's climate adaptation, it's social infrastructure to a community, it's gathering place, it's places where cultures can meet and share, and all of those aspects. And if you can build that sort of base of support. The value of parks near home is incredibly important. So I think it's, we pushed it hard, and it's still happening, as far as I know.
One of the things that really worries me a lot is that is the partisanship of conservation. And I suppose that's inevitable to some extent, because to the parts of the Republican Party, conservation means telling somebody they can't do something, and they don't like anything. They don't like regulation, almost ideologically. But how do you see any good news in making conservation less a Republican-Democrat thing? And I asked, in one comment you made worried me a little there. You say we should get out of our silos and maybe adopt some, join forces with other interests. But some of those interests sounded like interests of the Democratic Party, and that sort of has a downside. If we identify ourselves with certain political issues that one side is for and another side is against, aren't we acting to make our issue more partisan rather than less?
Yeah, I don't see it that way, but I think that people that work in this space, there's great power in strange bedfellows, and let's just say, for instance, that what we characterize as the hook and bullet crowd, the hunting and fishing community, it has been sort of bifurcated from the sort of classic conservation community, but yet there's a lot of common ground there that we need to figure out how to find. And what has happened, in my view, in the political world, is that conservation has sort of gone into the closet with the far right. There are a lot of closet conservationists on Capitol Hill, and I can tell you personal experience, going up on the Hill and meeting a brand new Tea Party, self-identified member of Congress, and I go in for the first time, they're freshmen, and I say, hi, I'm the director of the National Park Service, and they're like, director of the National Park Service? And they say, well, staff, would you step out for a minute? And then they pull down the shades and they say, will you sign my pass? And I love the national parks, but I can't say it. And then they go out in front of the press and they throw us under the bus, right? Because it's sort of the way things are operating right now. And so we've got to find ways to get them out into the sunlight and let them show those values. And part of it is constituent based. Part of it is getting that guy with the big belt buckle and the cowboy hat to say, I want to protect grizzly bears. I like grizzly bears. I don't want them eating my cows, but I like the fact that they're out there. And they will listen to that guy way more than they're going to listen to you, just because that's their constituency. And I think that sticking to the classic siloed sort of I only talk to people that agree with me is really, really wrong. And we've got to change that narrative. Yes, sir.
In the environmental program, we always advise our students as opportunities for vocations and things, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA, National Park Service. The morale at those places must be hideous right now, and so what should I be telling my students these days?
I would say that morale is low. There's absolutely no question about that. I keep in contact with a lot of my former colleagues, and what's really tragic, and I will say this to the young people in the room, is that for the young people that came into the service, and that would be the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, the BLM, the Park Service, and have only known the Obama administration, and now they're in the service and they're seeing the other side of that coin. It's very, very disheartening and disturbing. But you have to recognize that if you're going to work in the federal government, you're working in an executive branch, and the politics swing back and forth, and so a lot of the work goes underground, and the Park Service in particular is very good at guerrilla warfare, so that they will pull off a lot of these things, regardless of the administration. But it still makes it very, very difficult, because you spend an enormous amount of energy on defense, on sort of workarounds, and sort of staying below the radar, which is terribly unfortunate. My advice to a graduating group right now would be to not go into the agencies at the moment. Bide your time. Go do NGO work, go do something international, go work for the parks in Costa Rica or something for the next couple of years, and let this get through. Let us get through this. And then come back, because it can be an extraordinarily rewarding career to work in conservation within the agencies. I mean, you can get a lot done. You can do some really, really cool things. But at the moment, things are rough. Now, I will say, and in case I didn't dissuade you at all, is that the Trump administration proposed severely cutting the budget, and Congress gave it the best budget we've had in years. I mean, there's a $250 million increase in the Park Service budget, and so they're going to be hiring, and also there's a lot of folks leaving that probably would have stayed longer if there had been a different outcome in the presidential election. And the old adage that 35% of your workforce is eligible to retire. Well, they don't, though. They're eligible, but that doesn't mean they retire. We're starting to see that transition right now. We're starting to see a lot of folks saying, it's not worth it. I don't want to put up with this anymore. And so they're going. And now with this infusion from the appropriations, and it's a 2-year budget, that means that agencies are going to be able to hire. And so there may be some really great opportunities to come in and stay below the radar and wait them out.
Yeah, I mean, if you come in at the entry level, GS 5, 7, 9, you're under the radar of all of this political stuff. Your work is in the field 90% of the time. You're doing what you're trained to do. The politics doesn't interfere with that.
Yeah.
It's the silverbacks, the baby boomers that are retiring that have to put up with the politics, and so they're leaving in droves. But the entry-level professional positions will do what they've always done, and whether it's with the blessing from above or without it, they'll do what they do, and they'll be professional about it.
I'm Doug DeBerry, Environmental Science and Policy Program. Nice to meet you. First of all, how does one apply for this director's job? Sounds like a pretty good gig. Any intel on it? No.
Best job in government.
Secondly, and I probably should know the answer to this because of the colleagues that I'm sitting with here who work on Park Service projects all the time. But how has the NEPA process in your mind been compressed in the current administration? Because that's really the basis for all the actionable decisions that are made, as far as I'm aware, when something happens. I mean, what's your perspective on that?
So they have proposed a process, a sort of revision to the NEPA rules, but it's not instituted yet. But the concept was that, and this was part of the infrastructure proposal, that we would be willing to accept the EIS from another agency. So if the Department of, and here's the theory, so the Department of Transportation says that they want to run a pipeline from North Dakota to Virginia, and they do an EIS, then every federal agency would have to accept that EIS and just sign off on it.
Well, of course, we know that there's a lack of congruency between the way a Park Service EIS is typically
Bingo. Or every other agency that they're going to cross in that pathway, whether it's the FAA or whatever. So that's probably going to get challenged in the courts if they ever even do it. There's always pressure on the agencies during these periods to expedite NEPA processes, move it more quickly, create more categorical exclusions, all of that. I haven't seen any of that in writing. They may profess it, but I haven't seen it. That requires a fair amount of regulatory change. And I'm going to suppress the silverbacks in the room for a moment and let the students ask the questions, okay? So I want the young people to be able to ask the questions here as well. And I think you had a question.
Yes, sir. I was curious about for the ENSP 250 seminar that I've been writing a paper about factors that affect people's going to the park, like age, demographics, and environmental factors and natural disasters, and that kind of thing. And I was curious in how the parks have managed with the record number of people visiting, and more specifically, has the parks been successful in getting people to go to less popular parks as a way to take people out of the peak season at the most popular places?
Yeah, so I know we've attempted to you know, one of the positive benefits of social media, there are a lot of negative benefits, or negative aspects to it too, but there's some positive aspects to social media. One is that better trip planning. You know, you can at least decide when to go, where to go, and how crowded it is, you know, using webcams and other aspects of that. And the Park Service has been pretty aggressive in sort of building that capacity so that we can inform the visitor about, you know, don't come at 10 o'clock in the morning because you're going to sit in line, right? And maybe come in a different entrance, or maybe even go to the you want to see giant sequoias, you can go to another spot, maybe on the Forest Service. And so getting information out in a more timely and robust way is one of those keys. And then, but if you're bound and determined to walk the Zion Canyon, you know, there aren't any other alternatives, right? So there are temporal alternatives and seasonal alternatives to that. And then, you know, we ultimately, you know, institute transportation systems, and at some point we're probably going to hit capacity, and then we have to actually manage that, and that's a challenge. Those sometimes get challenged in court. They're hard to, you know, if you're the 752nd person to come in the door and they say, "I'm sorry, we're full," you're going to be upset, and so
Yes.
And write your congressman, and then they're going to, you know, bring me in there and yell at me. I think that's the thing. I think the one thing that I will say, and if you're putting some research effort into this, I've never been convinced that large crowds are an ecological problem. They're an experiential problem. They're an operational problem. They're a financial problem. I don't think they're an ecological problem, and certainly not compared to, you know, biodiversity decline, climate change, you know, mercury transport from coal-fired power plants, and a variety of other things that are stressing these environments in new ways. I'm not convinced that visitation does that. It definitely has an impact on your experience, and partly because we have built infrastructure to be able to handle significantly large crowds. What we don't know yet, and I hope we're putting some effort into it, is to understand the demographics of that visitation and whether or not we are achieving the kind of goal we're looking for is a better representation of the demographics of the nation. And I know that some parks are getting it, but not all of them. Okay, another question. Any other students got a question?
I do. I think you spoke to a component of your book being building partnerships and coalition building between various management agencies like the Park Service, BLM, Army Corps of Engineers, and other agencies. And I'm just wondering how you might have seen that manifest while you were the director, maybe some challenges that might have arisen. Because I did an SCA stint for about like 8 months, and one of my favorite facets was, you know, going to the National Conservation Training Center and having that interface with Fish and Wildlife as well as Park Service, and seeing that partnership. So I'm just wondering how that might have manifested in your position.
Yeah, so one of the things we did that really started with Ken Salazar when he was secretary, and Secretary Jewell carried it on, was what we called the Federal Recreation Council. I was the chair, and it rotated to me, but so it was all the land management agencies. So it was the Army Corps of Engineers, it was NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, Forest Service. And when you think about it, we sat around a table like this about once every 6 weeks. And in that room, we managed 30% of the land base of the United States.